is Friday, 16th February 2018. This is the SKN News Now Evening Edition. In the headlines tonight, nationally, a computer systems analyst is giving advice on how to protect against cyber attacks. Internationally, the body of the Filipino maid killed in Kuwait has been returned home. And in sport, the UK FA will raise human rights issues with the Qatar FA following a knowledge-sharing deal. We have the details of these stories, the weather and Carib update, all ahead in SKN News Now Evening Edition. Systems analyst in the Management Information Systems Department at the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, Derek Leonce, is offering practical advice on how persons can safeguard themselves against cyber attacks. Mr. Leonce says the first line of defense against cyber attacks is understanding how criminals operate and the loopholes they use to access potential victims' online data.
First, understanding the threats that are there, understanding the modus operandi of attackers, understanding the ways, the means by which attackers will seek to either attack you directly or leverage your environment to attack you. Okay? That is first and foremost. On the issue of vulnerabilities, looking within your environment, ensuring that, one, your systems are secure, ensuring that your operating systems on your computers and devices are up to date, that you have the requisite patches, that you are running antivirus, that if there is a firewall on your device, the firewall is enabled, ensuring that your device is secure.
He went on to explain that although there are steps which can be taken to minimize the risk of attack, there are also habits each person has which can either increase or decrease their risk of exposure to cyber attacks, and outlined how these can be addressed.
Then there is the habits that you would go forward with in terms of addressing issues, accessing the internet. Okay? You know, your behavior pattern goes a long way in terms of how secure you are, how much information that you allowed online. Everyone has a smartphone, but almost everyone has a smartphone today. Limit your smartphone to the services that you require. Okay? If you're going to install apps on smartphone, there is always a privacy setting. There's always a request for access to your contact list, access to your hard disk, and so on and so forth. Is it necessary for the function? You make a determination. And in many instances, you have the option of allowing or disallowing access. Okay? The recommendation is to limit access to only required services on your device. Obviously, there is on your device encryption. It is critical that you apply encryption if it's available for your device. Passwords, ensuring that you have secure passwords, complex enough passwords, that if your device was lost, it would require significant effort to be accessed.
Leonce also tackled the importance of creating secure passwords and avoiding the temptation of using birth dates or other easy-to-figure-out sequences to secure sensitive online data. He also offered sound advice on how to create a strong, hard-to-decipher passcode.
Passwords are really the keys to your kingdom. And if you're going to utilize passwords, then the approach has to be relatively complex passwords, relatively difficult to decrypt passwords, difficult to guess passwords. In fact, what I always recommend is a password of a minimum of 9 characters for personal use. Okay, corporate environments would have different password policies. Okay, I know corporate environments that require you to have a minimum of 14 character passwords. Users might say this is difficult to remember 14 characters at all times. Okay, so what I recommend in many instances are passphrases. A passphrase really is a sentence used as a password. They are more complex than regular passwords, and they are easier to remember. Okay. With a passphrase, you can have the complexity of a uppercase, a lowercase, a number, special characters, and obviously the length. A password might be A, B, J, K, a significant number of characters. That is always difficult to remember. But you can have a sentence as your passphrase. This is my last password. is an excellent password. If you can, a passphrase rather, if you can use some transposition and substitution of characters in there, okay? And you can use this pattern. Basically, what I recommend to individuals is to develop a pattern for creating passwords, okay? And creating passphrases, and use that method. Obviously, there is no point in creating complex passwords if you're going to make them available, okay? So confidentiality of passwords, protecting your passwords, do not write them down, do not keep them in places that are available and accessible to others.
And in other developments, in one of the swiftest executions of justice in the Federation, the young man who assaulted a female tourist on Wednesday after attempting to rob her has been arrested, found guilty, sentenced, and jailed. On Valentine's Day, Australian visitor Catherine McCumbee was walking along Hosfords Road when she was accosted by a young man who tried to take her bag. She resisted. Her assailant, later identified as 19-year-old Akeem Sage of Upper Thibu Avenue, then punched her in the face and ran off. McCumbee sustained injuries to her face and was assisted by persons who witnessed the incident and later transported to the JNF hospital for treatment. Sage was apprehended by authorities shortly after the incident. Police say that McCumbee was scheduled to leave the country yesterday. However, in an extremely fast carriage of justice, Sage was taken before the Bastia Magistrates Court on Wednesday afternoon, just hours after the attack. He pleaded guilty to the offense of wounding and apologized to the court and the defendant. He will now spend the next 8 months in prison with hard labor. Commenting on the speed with which this was handled, police say where there is cooperation, crimes like these and others can be quickly detected and criminals can be caught, charged, and convicted. The government on Thursday launched the National ICT Centre located in the Paul Southwell Industrial Park. The relaunched ICT Center will be the hub for providing training and globally recognized certifications, skills development, and entrepreneurship, as well as regional internet exchange point. Among those in attendance at the official opening ceremony yesterday were Prime Minister Dr. the Honorable Timothy Harris, other St. Kitts and Nevis government ministers and heads of department, Antigua and Barbuda's Minister for ICT, Broadcasting and Telecommunications, Melford Nicholas, Resident Ambassador of the Republic of China, Taiwan, George Gawei Chiao, representatives of Amazon and Microsoft, University of the West Indies, and the Cable. The opening ceremony was followed today by the Cyber Resilience Symposium and Technical Workshop. The launch of the National ICT Center is timely as in 2015, then Prime Minister, Right Honorable Dr. Denzel Douglas informed the nation that the country saw an increase in the mobile broadband penetration rate from 18.6 per 100 inhabitants to 71 per 100 inhabitants. This was attributed to a reduction in the cost of prepaid mobile broadband from $51.09 US in 2014 to $13.70 US in 2015. A year later, in 2016, St. Kitts and Nevis moved up 20 positions on that year's ICT Development Index global ranking, emerging third after the United States and Canada in the Americas region. And this morning, the St. Christopher National Trust launched its latest exhibit, Emancipation Journey. The Emancipation Journey exhibit, which will run from February 16th today through to March 16th, features the original act for the abolition of slavery, the Emancipation Act, that was passed in St. Kitts in July 1834 to come into effect on August 1st. Also on display will be original copies of 4 other related documents, including the Masters and Servants Act, as well as the text of the Emancipation Proclamation. The exhibit will also include a pictorial account of the period from emancipation to the early 20th century. In the feature address delivered by Director of the National Archives, Victoria Flaherty, she explained that this exhibit aims to expose the post-slavery experience in St. Kitts. She said during this period, while former slaves were legally free, there still remained many restrictions that had significant impact on their lives.
Things changed and didn't change at the same time. There was freedom in the sense of the law, but there were so many restrictions on what workers could do with their time and their abilities. We start the exhibition with the Emancipation Act that was passed here in St. Kitts. This was a requirement that the British government put in place because they wanted all colonies to pass their own legislation. The volume it is in contains not only the Emancipation Act, but all related acts to regulate the lives of the apprentices and their masters, so to speak, to make sure that law and order was enforced and so on.
Mrs. O'Flaherty outlined some of the other historically valuable documents which will be on display, many of which she noted are originals.
Another document that is on display is the Stipendiary Magistrates Journal, the journal of F. Robinson Taylor. Just one of them. He had several. We are probably the only island that still has these special magistrates journals. These were the magistrates who heard cases in the period after emancipation when people were complaining of not being paid enough or paid for the work that they did, and in some cases for other people complaining that their workers were being rude or not showing up for work. And we have examples of these things, mostly through the press, because we don't seem to have anything after the 1830s in the way of journals from them. We don't know what happened there. In other islands, they don't even have the ones from the 1830s. Another example of a document in there is the compensation claim. This one is not an original. We sent a scan to Tony and she reproduced it, and it shows the way the people in the post-emancipation, during apprenticeship, how they were divided into certain groups, and also what the planters and the British government thought they were worth.
The last exhibit at the museum ended in January this year and chronicled the pre-emancipation experience on St. Kitts. Stay with us. Still to come in this evening's news presentation, today's international developments, sport, and the weather. Last week, the body of a Filipino woman was discovered in a freezer in an abandoned apartment in Kuwait. It turned out to be Joanna Demathalis. She had gone to Kuwait to work as a maid, hoping to earn enough to support her family. Joanna's body had arrived in Manila, greeted by her distraught family. Her death prompted the government of the Philippines to order the repatriation of Filipino workers in Kuwait and to place a ban on further deployment there. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte condemned what he sees as a pattern of mistreatment of Filipino workers. Katia Lopez Hedon reports.
Joanna Demathalis went to Kuwait 4 years ago to work as a maid. She returned home in a coffin. Her distraught sister in tears as the wooden casket was carried off a plane.
This is a very big loss to us. She used to tell our mother her dreams. She was working abroad to be able to help our parents and our youngest sibling.
The family says Joanna's employer was strict and only allowed her to call home 3 times a year. But in 2016, the call stopped. They had no idea why until last week when a body was found in a freezer in an abandoned apartment in Kuwait City. It was Joanna's. Investigators say her body showed signs of strangulation and may have been in the freezer for more than a year.
Why did they do that to my sister? It hurts so much.
Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte was quick to condemn what he sees as a pattern of mistreatment of Filipino workers.
What have we done to you? to deserve this kind of treatment for my countrymen.
He is offering free flights home for Filipino workers in Kuwait. About 10,000 maids are expected to take up the offer.
I will sell my soul to the devil to look for money so that you can come home and live comfortably here.
An estimated 250,000 Filipinos are employed in Kuwait. In January, the Philippines suspended sending more workers after reports that abuse by employers had driven several workers to suicide. And now there's Joanna's case.
It's very tragic, but will also be a rallying point for all of the government agencies to be more aggressive abroad in helping our OFWs be protected.
Kuwait's government says it's outraged by Joanna's murder and is working on bringing her killers to justice. But that is of little comfort to her grieving family.
Australia's former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd has softened his stance on a tough immigration policy which he introduced in 2013. He said that he never intended for refugees to be kept in offshore prison camps for as long as they have been. Andrew Thomas reports.
Most refugees held on Manus Island in Papua New Guinea were sent there in 2013. So this year, most will mark 5 years in what they call Australia's remote island prison. That particular word isn't used in a report by a regional protection officer for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. But after a visit to Manus, his language is just as strong. He found a pervasive and worsening sense of despair among refugees and asylum seekers, a sense of desolation.
People would be walking around, their faces would be downcast, they're looking at the ground. Not many people are going out of their rooms.
Rico Salcedo says the need for medical care, mental health support and trauma counselling is critical and unmet. But really, the refugees shouldn't be on Manus at all. It's up to the country which sent them to Papua New Guinea to find them safe, long-term homes elsewhere.
Australia ultimately has responsibility for the welfare and for the solutions for people outside of Papua New Guinea.
Some refugees have flown to the United States under a resettlement deal Australia reached while Barack Obama was in office, but most have not, and their future is as uncertain as ever. The hardline policy to send refugees who arrived by boat to Manus Island was first introduced in July 2013 by then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd.
People who come by boat now have no prospect of being resettled in Australia. The rules have changed. If you come by boat, you will never permanently live in Australia.
Rudd lost an election shortly after that, and the Conservative government that's been in power since toughened his policies further. Earlier this week, Kevin Rudd reflected on the 10th anniversary of his national apology to Indigenous Aboriginal people mistreated for decades by various Australian governments. I interviewed him about that and then asked him whether he thought there'd ever be a need for a future Australian Prime Minister to issue another apology, this one to refugees sent by his government and subsequent ones to Manus Island or Nauru. Rudd wouldn't answer that, but did say he'd never meant refugees to be on Manus this long.
It's been inhumane in the extreme for the Conservative government of Australia to regard those who are on Manus as asylum seekers come to this country as purely domestic political pawns in a wider political game.
Despite what he said publicly in 2013, Kevin Rudd now says refugees on Manus should be found a home in Australia.
Still to come in this evening's news presentation, sport, the weather and Arab update. The UK Football Association will raise human rights abuses and homophobia issues with the Qatar FA after signing a memorandum of understanding with the hosts of the 2022 World Cup. The deal has raised concerns after the treatment of Qatar's migrant workers and with homosexuality still illegal. But the FA hopes it can positively influence football in Qatar and engage on wider social issues. Qatar controversially won the right to host the 2022 World Cup in 2010. FA Chairman Greg Dyke called it the worst moment in FIFA's history, following allegations of corruption which were dismissed by a FIFA report in 2014. Preparations for the showpiece, which is due to take place in the winter, have also been overshadowed by issues surrounding migrant workers' rights. In November 2017, however, the International Labour Organization closed a case against Qatar over its treatment of migrant workers. The United Nations agency said reforms agreed by the country meant 2 million workers now enjoyed better protection, including a minimum wage and allowing workers to leave the country without their employer's permission. And with that look at sport, we now have a look at this evening's weather forecast, valid until 8 p.m. tomorrow, Saturday. Across St. Kitts and Nevis, a weak high-pressure gradient will support gentle to moderate wind speeds across the islands as surface high pressure dominates the area. Therefore, tonight will be partly cloudy with a slight chance of passing showers. Tomorrow will be sunny to partly cloudy. Seas are moderate with waves of 1.5 to 2.1 meters or 5 to 7 feet. A caution is in place for small craft operators and sea bathers. Winds are east-northeasterly to easterly at 12 to 18 miles per hour. Today's maximum temperature is 28 degrees Celsius or 82 degrees Fahrenheit. The sea level pressure is 1,018.4 millibars or 30.07 inches. The amount of rainfall recorded for the month of February stands at 20.5 millimeters or 0.81 inches. The sun will rise tomorrow at 6:37 a.m. and set at 6:13 p.m. And that look at the weather brings us to the end of this evening's news presentation. Before we go, I'll recap this evening's top stories. Nationally, a computer systems analyst is giving advice on how to protect against cyber attacks. Internationally, the body of a Filipino maid killed in Kuwait has been returned home. And in sport, the UK FA will raise human rights issues with the Qatar FA following a knowledge-sharing deal. I've been your presenter, Ebony Brandon. Thank you so much for tuning in. Up next, Cab Update, followed by DJ Yardi. Have a wonderful weekend.